The unforgiving midday heat radiated off the congested asphalt of the financial district, creating a shimmering mirage over the sea of stalled luxury vehicles. Inside the soundproof sanctuary of a custom-town car, the city's chaos was reduced to a silent movie. Arthur Vance, the ruthless young CEO of Vance Global, checked his platinum watch for the third time in 2 minutes. His jaw was set in a tight line of perpetual impatience. Across from him, swirling a glass of sparkling water, sat his business partner and oldest rival, Tristan Cole. Tristan thrived on Arthur's irritation. He leaned forward, a cynical smile playing on his lips, and looked out the tinted window at the frantic city life moving around them. "You are losing your touch, Arthur," Tristan murmured, his voice dripping with casual arrogance. "You spend millions acquiring companies, yet you cannot even secure a date for the annual shareholder gala this weekend. The board is already whispering about your lack of stability. A man who cannot commit to a dinner companion makes investors very nervous." Arthur did not bother to look at him. His dark eyes remained fixed on the traffic ahead. "I do not have time for the superficial social climbing of the women in our circle, Tristan. They are predictable. They speak in rehearsed compliments and calculate my net worth while pretending to admire my tie. It is exhausting, and quite frankly, bad for business." Tristan laughed, a sharp, unamused sound. "It is a game, Arthur. You just refuse to play it. But I will make it interesting for you. I bet you $1 million, transferred directly to your favorite charity, that you cannot take a complete stranger from this very street, bring her to the gala, and convince the entire board of directors that she is a woman of high society, a woman of our world." Arthur finally turned his head, his gaze cold and calculating. He looked out the window, his eyes scanning the crowded sidewalk, the stressed pedestrians, the exhausted workers. It was a ridiculous proposition, born of Tristan's endless boredom. But Arthur Vance never refused a challenge. He was about to dismiss the bet entirely when a sudden movement caught his attention. Weaving through the gridlocked traffic, carrying a heavy plastic cooler strapped to her shoulder, was a young woman. She was selling bottles of ice water to the frustrated drivers. Her clothes were simple, faded jeans and a plain white shirt, but the way she moved commanded a strange sense of authority. She did not beg, she did not plead. She simply held up a bottle, her chin raised high, offering a transaction. As she approached their car, Arthur noticed her eyes. They were a piercing, intelligent shade of green, completely devoid of the exhaustion that plagued the rest of the street. Arthur reached over and pressed the button to roll down the tinted window. The sudden blast of oppressive heat and city noise filled the quiet cabin. Tristan raised an eyebrow in disbelief as Arthur leaned toward the window. The young woman stopped by the car. She did not flinch at the sight of the expensive interior or the sharp, tailored suits of the men inside. She simply pulled an ice-cold bottle from her cooler and held it out. $5, she said, her voice steady and surprisingly melodic, carrying no trace of intimidation. Arthur pulled a crisp $100 bill from his silver money clip and held it out the window. He expected her eyes to widen. He expected gratitude, a breathless thank you, perhaps a desperate attempt to keep the change. Instead, the young woman looked at the bill, then looked directly into Arthur's eyes. She did not reach for the money. "I do not have change for $100, she stated flatly. "Keep it," Arthur said, his tone laced with the casual dismissal of a man who bought everything and everyone. "Just give me the water." The woman slowly lowered the bottle and placed it back into her cooler. She looked at Arthur with a mixture of pity and absolute defiance. "I am selling water, sir. I am not asking for charity. If you do not have $5, you do not get the water." She turned on her heel and began to walk away, moving toward the next car. Arthur froze. In his entire adult life, no one had ever walked away from his money. No one had ever told him no over something so trivial. Tristan burst into laughter in the background, clapping his hands together. "Oh, this is priceless," Tristan gasped. The great Arthur Vance rejected by a girl selling water in traffic. "There is your target, Arthur." "I dare you, I double dare you. Take her to the gala." Arthur ignored Tristan. He opened the car door and stepped out into the sweltering heat, adjusting his suit jacket. He walked quickly, catching up to the young woman just as the traffic began to inch forward. "Wait," Arthur said, his voice carrying the commanding edge he used in boardrooms. She stopped and turned to face him, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead. She looked him up and down, unimpressed. "The light is green, sir. You are holding up traffic." "My name is Arthur Vance," he said, expecting the name to carry its usual weight. "Good for you, Arthur. My name is Ilara. Now, unless you found a $5 bill in those expensive pockets, I have to get back to work." "I want to hire you," Arthur said, cutting straight to the point. He crossed his arms, leaning slightly forward to intimidate her, a tactic that usually worked flawlessly. "I have a corporate event this Saturday, a very high-profile dinner. I need a companion for the evening. I will pay you $50,000 for one night of your time. You will wear what I tell you to wear, you will smile, and you will pretend we are acquainted." Ilara Thorne did not blink. She looked at the towering glass skyscrapers surrounding them, then back at the arrogant billionaire standing in the middle of the street. Inside, her heart hammered a frantic rhythm, but she forced her face to remain a mask of cool indifference. $50,000 was exactly the amount she needed to pay off the private investigators, keeping her hidden from her past. It was a dangerous amount of money. It was freedom. But she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her desperation. "My time is expensive, Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous whisper. "And unlike your corporate takeovers, it is not for sale to the highest bidder, just because you demand it." Arthur was taken aback. The women in his world would have fainted at the offer, yet this street vendor was negotiating with the poise of a seasoned diplomat. 100,000, Arthur countered, taking a step closer. "Cash, tomorrow morning. All you have to do is play a part for 4 hours. Surely your pride is not worth more than $100,000. Ilara stared at him. She saw the challenge in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he could buy her compliance. She made a decision that would either save her life or destroy the careful disguise she had spent 2 years building. "Fine," Ilara said, holding her ground, "but I have conditions. You do not touch me unless it is absolutely necessary for the performance. You do not ask about my personal life, and I choose my own dress. If I am going to play the part of a high society trophy, I will do it on my own terms." Arthur felt a strange spark of adrenaline. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek black business card and handed it to her. "Come to the Vance Global Tower tomorrow at noon. We will finalize the contract. Do not be late, Ilara." "I am never late, Mr. Vance," she replied, taking the card without looking at it. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the sea of cars. 2 days later, Arthur sat in his penthouse suite, nursing a glass of bourbon. The gala was only hours away. He had sent an elite styling team to the luxury hotel suite he had booked for Ilara. He expected a disaster. He expected a clumsy, overwhelmed girl drowning in silk and diamonds. The heavy oak doors of his private lounge opened. Tristan walked in first, holding 2 glasses, a smug expression plastered across his face. "Prepare to write that check to my charity, Arthur. I just saw your street vendor in the lobby. It is going to be a bloodbath tonight." Before Arthur could respond, the sound of confident, measured footsteps echoed in the hallway. Ilara stepped into the dim light of the lounge, and the air left Arthur's lungs. She was not wearing the overly extravagant sequined disaster he had anticipated. Instead, she wore a vintage midnight blue velvet gown that hugged her frame perfectly. It was understated, incredibly elegant, and screamed of old generational wealth. But it was not just the dress. It was the way she held her shoulders, the tilt of her chin, the effortless grace with which she walked across the Persian rug, moving like someone who had spent her entire life walking through palaces, not dodging cars in city traffic. Tristan's smug smile vanished instantly. The glass in his hand tilted, spilling a drop of liquor onto his expensive shoes. Arthur stood up slowly, setting his drink down. He looked into Ilara's green eyes and realized with a sudden chill that he had made a terrible miscalculation. The woman standing in his penthouse was not a street vendor pretending to be wealthy. She was something much more dangerous. She was someone hiding in plain sight. "Shall we go, Mr. Vance?" Ilara asked smoothly, offering a polite, icy smile. "We would not want to keep your board of directors waiting." Arthur offered her his arm, his mind racing with 1,000 questions he was forbidden by contract to ask. As her hand rested lightly on his sleeve, the subtle scent of jasmine and something familiar reached him. The game had just changed entirely, and Arthur Vance was no longer sure he was the one in control. The night was only beginning, and the secrets hidden beneath the velvet and the wealth were threatening to tear everything apart. If this story has captured your attention, share it with someone who appreciates a true clash of pride and power. Subscribe and stay tuned for the next part, where the truth of the gala will be revealed, and the real battle begins. We will see you very soon. The grand entrance of the Crystal Ballroom was flooded with the blinding flashes of the press. As Arthur guided Elara toward the towering double doors, he recognized the elite crew from Mila Martini Photography, the only agency trusted to document the inner circles of the city's financial elite. He instinctively tightened his grip on Elara's waist, fully expecting her to flinch or stumble under the overwhelming, predatory attention of the cameras. Instead, she adjusted her posture, offering the lenses a serene, mysterious smile that gave absolutely nothing away. She moved through the chaotic flashes of light with the fluid confidence of a woman who had been born onto the red carpet, leaving Arthur completely bewildered. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly opulent. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in silk, where the city's most ruthless minds calculated their next moves over plates of caviar. As Arthur introduced Elara to the board of directors, he watched her carefully. Tristan Cole sat across from them, his eyes narrowed like a hawk waiting for a mouse to make a mistake. Tristan launched a barrage of subtle, condescending questions, designed to expose her lack of breeding. He asked about global market trends, obscure European art exhibitions, and vintage wines, fully expecting her to crumble into an awkward silence. Elara did not crumble. She elegantly declined a glass of vintage champagne, stating quietly that she preferred to keep her mind sharp in rooms full of sharks. When Tristan pressed her on a recent, highly complex corporate merger, she dismantled his argument with 3 devastatingly polite sentences, exposing a flaw in his financial logic that left the entire table in stunned silence. Arthur felt an unfamiliar surge of pride, mixed with a deep, unsettling suspicion. This woman was not a street vendor. The precision of her vocabulary, the way she held her silver, the casual arrogance with which she dismissed Tristan's probing questions, these were weapons forged in the very world Arthur controlled. The tension in the room grew too thick, and Elara quietly excused herself to get some air. Arthur waited a few minutes before following her out onto the grand stone balcony. The night air was crisp, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the ballroom. Elara stood by the marble balustrade, looking out over the glittering city skyline. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. Arthur took off his tailored suit jacket and draped it silently over her bare shoulders. It was a small, quiet gesture of care, completely out of character for a man known for his cold indifference. Elara looked up at him, her green eyes softening for a fraction of a second before the walls came back up. "You are a terrible liar, Elara," Arthur said softly, standing beside her in the cool night air. "You navigated that room better than women who have spent their entire lives training for it. Who are you really?" Before she could answer, the balcony doors swung open. Tristan stepped out, holding a glowing tablet in his hand. The smug, cynical smile had returned to his face, but there was a dangerous edge to his eyes now. "I asked myself the exact same question, Arthur," Tristan interrupted, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet space. "So, I had my security team run a deep facial recognition scan on our lovely guest. It took them a while to bypass the heavy encryption on the old archives, but they finally found a match." Tristan shoved the tablet into Arthur's hands. On the screen was an old Society magazine cover, featuring a younger Elara wearing a diamond tiara, standing next to an older man. The headline read, "The Fall of the Holloway Empire." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. He looked from the screen to the woman standing beside him. "You are Elara Holloway," he whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. 5 years ago, Vance Global had executed a ruthless, hostile takeover of Holloway Maritime. It was the acquisition that had cemented Arthur's reputation as a corporate predator. He had dismantled the company piece by piece, liquidating assets and crushing the Holloway family legacy into dust. Elara's father had passed away shortly after the ruin, and his only daughter had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the unforgiving city. "You brought a spy into our inner circle, Arthur," Tristan spat, his voice dripping with venom. "She has been playing you since the street corner. This was all a setup for revenge. The board is going to destroy you for this level of incompetence." Arthur did not look at Tristan. His dark eyes were locked on Ilara, searching for a trace of malice, a hint of the calculated revenge Tristan was accusing her of. But all he saw in her eyes was a profound, exhausting pain. "I did not seek you out, Arthur," Ilara said, her voice trembling slightly, shedding the confident persona she had worn all night. Her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. "I was selling water on the street because your company froze my family's remaining trust funds. I have spent 2 years hiding, working 3 jobs just to survive the ruin you created. You stopped your car. You made the offer. I just took the money because I am tired of starving in the shadows of the buildings my father built." The truth hit Arthur with the force of a physical blow. The crushing weight of his own ruthless ambition stared back at him in the form of the beautiful broken woman wearing his jacket. The confrontation was devoid of screaming or theatrics. It was just the heavy, suffocating reality of what his wealth had cost someone else. "Get out, Tristan," Arthur commanded, his voice deadly quiet. Tristan scoffed, straightening his tie. "You are a fool, Arthur. This will ruin you." He turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving them alone in the freezing silence. The drive back to the penthouse was agonizing. The soundproof cabin of the car, which had felt like a sanctuary 2 days ago, now felt like a prison. Neither of them spoke a word. The space between them was filled with a cold, impenetrable distance. Arthur did not try to apologize, knowing that words were useless against the magnitude of what he had done to her family. When they arrived, Ilara retreated to the guest suite and locked the door without looking back. The following morning arrived with a heavy grey sky. Ilara packed her few belongings, fully expecting security to escort her out of the building, or worse, to be handed a legal document threatening her to stay quiet. She opened the heavy oak door of her room, preparing for the worst. Instead, the hallway was empty. Resting on a small silver tray on a table beside her door was a single steaming cup of coffee. It was brewed exactly the way she had ordered it from a small cafe during a brief pause in their fitting the day before. There was no expensive jewelry. There was no formal letter of apology. It was just a quiet, deliberate gesture of attention, a silent plea for a truce in a war she had never wanted to fight. As Ilara picked up the warm cup, a news alert chimed on her phone. Tristan Cole had just leaked a statement to the financial press, calling for an emergency board meeting to vote on the immediate removal of Arthur Vance as CEO, citing extreme negligence and compromised judgment. The true battle for survival was no longer about the past. It was happening right now. If this twist in the story kept you on the edge of your seat, share it with a friend who loves a good corporate drama and a complicated romance. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the final conclusion of Arthur and Ilara's story. We will see you in the next and final part. The heavy grey clouds over the city finally broke, casting long, pale shadows across the glass walls of Vance Global. Arthur stood at the head of the long obsidian boardroom table, facing a firing squad of angry shareholders and anxious executives. Tristan Cole paced at the opposite end of the room, playing the role of the concerned partner to absolute perfection. Tristan painted Arthur as a reckless, emotionally compromised liability who had brought a corporate spy into their most confidential gatherings. The board members nodded in solemn agreement. The vote for Arthur's immediate removal was moments away. Arthur remained completely silent, his jaw clenched, accepting his defeat not because he was weak, but because he knew Tristan was right about one thing. He had let his guard down. Outside the building, Ilara stood on the pavement, clutching the warm cup of coffee Arthur had left for her. She had every reason to walk away and let the wolves tear him apart. It was what he deserved for destroying her family. But as she read the articles flooding her phone, a memory surfaced. Before her father died, he had shown her a series of encrypted financial logs, a strange anomaly in the buyout that he called the Code of the Chosen. It was a hidden sequence of transactions that proved the Holloway company was not failing, but was being systematically drained from the inside. And the signature on those hidden offshore transfers did not belong to Arthur Vance. It belonged to Tristan Cole. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding crash. The entire room fell silent. Ilara walked in, no longer wearing the vintage velvet gown or the faded jeans of a street vendor. She wore a tailored blazer in a warm, dusty bronze shade, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying competence. Tristan stopped pacing, his smug expression twisting into a scowl. Security was called, but Arthur raised a hand, stopping the guards at the door. He watched her with a mixture of shock and reverence as she walked straight to the center of the table and connected a small silver drive to the main projector. "I apologize for the interruption, gentlemen," Ilara said, her voice clear and carrying effortlessly across the large room. "My name is Ilara Holloway, and while Mr. Cole is entirely correct that I have a deeply personal interest in this company, he is lying about why he wants Mr. Vance removed today." Tristan slammed his hand on the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "This is absurd. You are a bitter, bankrupt girl looking for a payout. Turn off that screen immediately." Ilara ignored him completely. With a single click, a complex web of financial documents filled the wall. She methodically walked the board through the encrypted logs her father had left behind. She exposed how Tristan had bribed an auditor to artificially crash Holloway Maritime's stock, allowing Vance Global to buy it for a fraction of its worth, while Tristan personally siphoned millions into a private shell company. Arthur had been the public face of the ruthless takeover, but Tristan had been the architect of the fraud. The room erupted into chaos. The board members who had been nodding at Tristan moments ago were now shouting for the legal team. Tristan stammered, frantically trying to explain away the documents, but the digital trail was undeniable. Arthur watched the man he had considered a partner crumble under the weight of his own greed. Within minutes, the board suspended Tristan indefinitely, pending a full federal investigation. As the disgraced executive was escorted out of the room by the same security guards he had tried to summon, he did not look back. The boardroom slowly emptied, leaving only Arthur and Ilara in the deafening silence of the aftermath. Arthur stood up, the heavy burden of the last few years finally lifting from his shoulders, replaced by a profound sense of guilt. He walked over to her, stopping a few feet away, respecting the space between them. "You had every right to let him destroy me," Arthur said softly, his voice stripped of all its usual arrogance. "Why did you come back?" Ilara looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Because my father taught me to build things, Arthur, not to watch them burn. You were a ruthless businessman, but you played by the rules of the market. Tristan was a thief. There is a difference." Arthur nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy embossed folder. He placed it gently on the table between them. "I cannot undo the past, Ilara, but I can change the future. This is the deed to Holloway Maritime. It is fully restored as an independent subsidiary, and the board has just unanimously approved its new chief executive officer. It belongs to you. No strings attached. No contracts." Ilara stared at the folder, the weight of her family legacy resting quietly on the polished wood. She reached out and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she had touched him willingly, a small, tender gesture that spoke louder than any apology. 1 year later, the harsh midday sun warmed the spacious corner office of the newly rebuilt Holloway Maritime headquarters. Ilara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, reviewing a finalized contract. The door opened softly, and Arthur walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the small cafe down the street. He was no longer the cold, untouchable billionaire of the past. There was a warmth in his eyes, a quiet peace he had only found after surrendering his pride. He handed her a cup, pulling her gently by the waist and pressing a soft kiss to her temple. They had spent the last 12 months not just rebuilding an empire, but building a life together, grounded in truth and a love that had survived the darkest of beginnings. If this journey of redemption, power, and unexpected love captured your imagination, please share it with someone who believes that true strength lies in forgiveness. Subscribe to the channel to discover more stories where pride falls and true love conquers all. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next story.
Editor. The infographic presents Arthur Vance and Ilara Holloway's story as more than a romance between 2 people from opposite social worlds. At its center is a conflict between power and dignity. Arthur begins the story as a wealthy CEO who believes almost every problem can be solved through money, influence, or control. When he meets Ilara selling water in traffic, he immediately approaches her through that same worldview. He offers far more money than the water is worth and assumes generosity will guarantee obedience. Ilara's refusal becomes psychologically important because it challenges the system Arthur has built around himself. She may be struggling financially, but she refuses to allow hardship to define her value. Her dignity becomes the first force Arthur cannot purchase. The social contrast between them also exposes one of the story's main themes. Arthur represents visible privilege, corporate authority, and financial security, while Ilara represents the hidden consequences that powerful decisions can create. Her situation demonstrates that poverty does not necessarily reflect a lack of intelligence, education, or capability. When she enters the gala and moves confidently among wealthy executives, the assumptions made about her begin to collapse. Her knowledge of finance, culture, and social behavior reveals that appearances can hide complex histories and that social status is often treated as evidence of personal worth when it should not be. Psychologically, Ilara's behavior reflects resilience shaped by loss and trauma. She has learned to protect herself by controlling what others know about her past. Her confidence is not evidence that she has escaped emotional pain. Instead, it functions partly as armor. Arthur is emotionally guarded in a different way. His defense mechanism is control. Rather than allowing vulnerability, he manages people and situations as if they were business negotiations. Their relationship therefore develops through a gradual shift from suspicion to recognition and finally to trust. Arthur must recognize Ilara as a person rather than a challenge, while Ilara must determine whether Arthur is capable of becoming something different from the ruthless businessman connected to her family's destruction. Tristan Cole represents the darker side of ambition. Unlike Arthur, whose ruthlessness exists within the competitive logic of business, Tristan deliberately manipulates information and exploits others for personal gain. His betrayal highlights the difference between ambition and corruption. The boardroom revelation becomes the moral turning point because truth finally becomes more powerful than reputation. Ilara could allow Arthur to fall, but she chooses to expose Tristan because justice matters more to her than revenge. This choice also restores her agency. She is no longer simply the victim of decisions made by powerful men. She becomes the person capable of changing the entire outcome. Arthur's redemption does not come from romance alone. It begins when he accepts responsibility for the damage connected to his actions and stops using wealth as a substitute for accountability. Restoring Holloway Maritime to Ilara symbolizes a deeper transformation. For the first time, he uses power not to possess something, but to return what was lost. Their eventual relationship becomes believable because it develops only after truth, responsibility, and respect replace the original imbalance between them. Ultimately, the story resonates because it connects personal emotions with larger social questions about class, corporate ethics, trauma, reputation, and forgiveness. It suggests that dignity cannot be bought, competence can exist behind poverty and silence, and success without ethical responsibility can leave invisible victims behind. Most importantly, it presents redemption as an active process. The past cannot simply be erased. It must be confronted, understood, and answered with different choices. Arthur and Ilara's journey therefore becomes a story about rebuilding more than a company. It is about rebuilding trust, identity, and the possibility of a future shaped by truth rather than pride.